Hello everyone, welcome to Easy Economics. How are you all doing? I hope you all are doing good. Today I've brought for you all October November 2025 9708 Variant 13. We'll be doing MCQs today. So let's see what this paper has brought for us. MCQ number 1. MCQ number 1 talks about an article that appeared in a newspaper. It says the economies of the poorest nations have large international debts. The richest nations should cancel these debts and reduce poverty. For these nations, what is the nature of each statement? Now, they've given us a table. One part displays poorest nations have large international debts. The second part says richest nations should cancel these debts to reduce poverty. Now, they are asking us which of these statements is a normative statement and which is a positive statement. So, now if you recall the definition, you tell me what is a normative statement. Normative statement is what? One which talks about value judgment, one which cannot be proven. And what's a positive statement? On the contrary, a positive statement is one that's based on evidences or that's based on facts. So now, let's look at the options. Poorest nations have large international debts. That's a normative statement or that's a positive statement. You decide. And the second statement says richest nations should cancel these debts to reduce poverty. So now we know that poorest nations have large international debts. That's what? That's a positive statement. That's a factual based statement. So this has to be positive. So looking at that, we can chop A and B because A and B both talks about normative. So it cannot be A and B. What about the second part? The second part says richest nations should cancel these debts to reduce poverty. So now this is what? This is a value judgment statement, right? So this is a normative statement. So looking at that, it has to be option D. So we'll shade in D as the correct response. Moving forward, MCQ number 2. MCQ number 2 says, what is meant by the division of labor? Now we know what is division labor. When we break down the entire production processes, entire production process or the entire production processes are broken down into simple individual tasks, right? Done by each labor, right? And then what happens? Each labor specializes at those tasks, right? It's broken down. So what is meant by that? It's a process split into a series of individual tasks. The very first option displays the answer. So for 2, it has to be A. Some MCQs are pretty straightforward, and if you know the definition, if you're clear with the concepts, so you can easily mark the correct response. MCQ number 3. MCQ number 3 says, what would be an opportunity cost of growth in an economy? So now if an economy decides to invest, if it decides to grow, what would be the opportunity cost? It would be consuming less, it's investing more, right? So the reduction of consumption if growth requires investment. So you're consuming less and you are investing, right? So when you invest, what happens? Consumption falls. So when we invest, consumption falls. So for 3, it has to be D. It cannot be A, it cannot be B, it cannot be C. Now, why it can't be A, B, and C? Let me explain the logic. The faster growth of services in manufacturing, it's not necessary. Right? It's opportunity cost of growth. How can you say that? The need for an increased level of imported raw materials. Again, this is not an opportunity cost of growth, right? Because you are investing, right? So you do not know you are growing by way of what? Production of what? The need for greater government intervention. Whenever we are talking about growth, this means we are investing. And when we are investing, that means we are consuming less. MCQ number 4. MCQ number 4 says, with change in the way resources are allocated in an economy, is consistent with moving from a planned economy to a market economy. So now what happens when economies move from planned to market economy? What is usually happening? Option A says a minimum price guarantee for Apple producers is removed. Yes, that's the correct answer, because once we are talking about a market economy, what happens? Price is determined through the interaction of market forces, where demand meets supply, right? It's determined through market mechanism. That's the correct answer. But then, what about the remaining ones? A new government authority is established to monitor inefficiencies in Apple production. Inefficiencies exist in market economy. Remember, we talked about externalities, right? The production of apples is subsidized to increase output. The sale of apples is a maximum price imposed. So maximum price is done after the externalities are there, or in order to uh, restore this equilibrium in the market, right? That comes in later. But then, once you're talking about a market economy, they're saying that's a part and parcel of that. So, any form of price guarantees is removed. That's for sure, right? Because look at the words, they're saying it is consistent, right? So, you can't be sure that the maximum price and the subsidies are there, right? MCQ number 5. MCQ number 5 says if they are displaying us the production possibility curve, the vertical axis displays good Y, horizontal displays good X. Initial PPC curve is PPC naught, this one. And they're saying initially the economy produces these two goods X and Y. Both require labor. What is the effect of the PPC following the emigration of a large number of workers? So now if the workers leave the country, how is going to affect the PPC? If both goods require labor, so the entire PPC should shift inwards, and there should be a fall in the production of both X and Y goods, right, in the production. So where should the PPC should move? From PPC naught to PPC 1. Exactly. Why? Because this displays that there is a reduction in the production of both goods. So now this is the quantity of good Y, and this is the quantity of good X being produced, right? So for 5, we'll shade in B. Number 6. A good is provided by the government. Consumption by one person does not affect the amount of good available for others. So if government is providing a certain good and one person's consumption is not reducing the amount available for others, first tell me what characteristic it is talking about. It is talking about non-rivalry, right? So when we are talking about non-rivalry, what sort of a good is that? It's a public good. So for 6, we'll shade in D. MCQ number 7. MCQ number 7 displays 3 downward sloping demand curves. Vertical axis displays the price. The horizontal displays the quantity demanded. They're saying usually the market demand curves are downward sloping. They may also shift from D1 to D2 or D3. Now they're saying what would cause a movement along D1 for good X and not a shift to either D2 or D3. So now they're saying if, let's suppose, this is the initial demand curve D1, what would enable a movement along the same curve? That means whatever changes are taking place, that's taking place in the same curve, and there's no shifting of the curves, either on the right side or towards the left. We all know that whenever we're talking about movements along the same demand curve, we are referring to changes caused by the price of the good itself. And other factors other than the price of the good itself would cause what? A shift of the demand curve to either sides, depending upon its impact and the elasticities, right? So for 7, it has to be C. This we know since O levels, right? We did it in our IGCSE as well. MCQ number 8. The diagram shows the demand curve and supply curve for broken rice that is considered to be an inferior good. So now broken rice is considered to be an inferior good. Inferior good is what? As income rise, its consumption falls. So first thing you know, that inferior good is one that or whose demand falls once income rises. So if income is going to rise, its quantity demanded is going to fall. Now they're saying the market is in equilibrium at point X. So now this is the situation. This is P1 and this is Q1. That's the price and that's the equilibrium quantity. What is the new equilibrium if the household's income rises? So now let's suppose the income rises. So what should happen? Quantity demanded should fall because we know it's an inferior good. If the quantity demanded should fall, what should happen? The demand curve should be shifting inwards. Why? Because it's income. It's causing it. So if I draw a demand curve inwards, right? So this is my D1 and what happens? Now this is the new equilibrium position. So D is the new equilibrium position. So for 8, I'll put in D as the correct response. I hope it's clear. Moving forward, MCQ number 9. MCQ number 9 talks about good X has an income elasticity of demand value of negative 0.8. Cross elasticity of demand is also a negative 0.8. What are the characteristics of good X? Now we know if income elasticity is negative, this means what? This means as income rise, quantity demanded falls. This means what? This means again it's an inferior good. So the negative sign displays that it's an inferior good. Right? Cross elasticity demand is also negative. This means what? This means that price of good Y if rises, then demand for good X should fall. So this means these are what? These are complements. So the negative sign denotes what? Negative sign shows that these are complements or these are jointly demanded goods. So now we know that good X is what? Is an inferior good that is a complement to good Y. Right? So for 9, we'll shade in C. How do we know that? The negative signs are helping us deduce that. All right. MCQ number 10. MCQ number 10 says 4 firms produce furniture. So A, B, C, and D are 4 firms that are producing furniture. Now for each firm, they disclose us the price elasticity supply for each of them. Now they're saying if the price of the furniture rises by 5%, which firm would experience an increase in quantity supplied of 2.5%? So now we'll put in the formula. We know price elasticity of supply is equals to percentage change in quantity supplied upon percentage change in price. So percentage change in quantity supplied is what? We don't know, right? Percentage change in price is 0.05, right? And they want what? They want which firm is getting a 2.5%. They want this value to arrive at 2.5%. So what we can do is by trial and error, in place of price elasticity of supply, you will put in values for each firm. First you put in a 2.5, then you put in a 2, then you put in a 0.6, and finally you put in a 0.5. So once you put in a 0.5, you'll get 0.025, which means 2.5%. So D is the correct answer. By trial and error, what you will do is for each firm, you'll put in the price that supply over here so that the change in quantity supplied, they want to finally turn out to be 2.5%. Right? So you'll do that. So for 10, it has to be D. Number 11. The diagram shows supply and demand for a good. The original equilibrium is at X. So this is the initial demand curve and this is the initial supply curve, D1 and S1. They're saying what will be the new equilibrium if subsidies are given to firms for new machinery. So if subsidies are given, what should happen? The supply should increase. If the supply should increase, the demand should remain the same. So keeping on the same demand curve, moving on to S2, this should be the new equilibrium position. So we'll move to D. 11, D. Why? Because output will increase. Once subsidies is there, output will increase. So output will increase, so supply should increase. So the entire supply curve should shift outwards towards the right, right? But we'll keep on the same demand curve D1. So D1 S2, that's the new demand in the supply curve. And the equilibrium position is determined is D. Moving forward, MCQ number 12. MCQ number 12 says the market for good X is in equilibrium when price is $10. The government decides to set a maximum price for good X. A maximum price is what? That is below the x-axis, right? So this is the maximum price. That means it should not go beyond this. Initially it was at 10. So this is price and this is the quantity demanded. Now they're saying what? Which maximum price will cause the largest change in consumer surplus? So now we know this should be what? This should be the shortage, right? The maximum consumer surplus would occur. You see, the maximum price, in order to be effective, it has to be at a price below the equilibrium. So all these prices 10, 11 and 12, 10 was at equilibrium. There was no consumer surplus, right? At 11 and 12, there would be excess supply, right? So we want what? Excess demand, right? So excess demand exists at a price below the equilibrium, that is at 9. So for 12, it has to be A. Assuming demand, MCQ number 13. Assuming demand is price elastic, that means a small change in price causes a large change in quantity demanded. What will rise the most if an indirect tax is removed? So now what happens? When you remove an indirect tax, the good becomes cheap, right? Its price falls. So its price falls, what happens? Consumer spending increase. So when consumer spending increase, what happens? Producers revenue increase. Yes, spending will increase, but what will rise the most? Producers revenue. So for 13, it has to be C. Number 14. Which area of government spending is a transfer payment? We know what's a transfer payment, against which it's a payment from tax revenue that is received, right? It is for the vulnerable, right? For the elderly, for the disabled, right? When you give unemployment benefits or when you give pensions, right? It's spending against which there is no direct production, right? So now let's look at the option keeping the definition in our mind. Spending on new road building, again, the government is constructing roads, so that's not transfer payment. Spending on buying new police cars, again, it's making a transaction. Spending on wages of teachers, again, it's hiring the services and paying against that. It's only in option B when it's spending on the vulnerable, right? Paying pensions to the elderly, right? So for 14, it has to be B. Transfer payments, again, always remember against which there is no direct production, right? For 14, we'll shade in B. Number 15, we are halfway through the paper. A government provides a subsidy for a product with a perfectly price inelastic demand. So what's a perfectly price inelastic demand in which PED is 0, right? So when PED is 0, now they're saying the government is providing a subsidy to such a product. So what do you think should happen? Subsidy should cause the price to fall, right? Then what happens? What prevents producers from benefiting from this subsidy? So now why do you think producers will not benefit from this subsidy? The subsidy causes a large reduction in the price of the product as its price relative demand is infinite. No, its price relative demand is zero. We know PED is zero whenever it's perfectly inelastic, so we'll automatically chop A, C, and D. So the subsidy will cause a large reduction in the price of the product as its price relative demand is zero. 15 will shade in B. This is the curve when PED is zero, perfectly inelastic, right? Number 16. A government intervenes in the market for good X if it fixes a minimum price above the market equilibrium. So now this is the price it fixes. This is the price, minimum price above the equilibrium. Right? Now what happens? This is minimum price. Which situation explains why the government would do this? Now, why do you think it did that? Good X, it's raising its price by establishing it at a price higher than the equilibrium price because it wants to do what? Reduce its consumption. So it will reduce its consumption in which scenario? When it's a merit good that's in favor of the public, or it's causing negative externalities. It must be a demerit good, right? That's why it want to chop its consumption. So looking at the first part of the table, it could either be A or B because both talk about demerit good. So we'll automatically chop C and D. Now let's look at the second part. Why would it intervene? It wants to increase consumption, decrease consumption. Obviously, it's a demerit good and it wants to decrease the consumption, right? So for 16, it has to be A. Maybe it could be alcohol. Maybe it could be cigarettes. Something that is harmful for the health or the well-being or the productivity of its citizens, right? So 16 will shade in A. Number 17. The table shows some national income statistics. Now this is displayed as three key figures. They talked about GDP at basic prices, they talk about indirect taxes, they talk about subsidies, all in dollar billion. They're asking what is GDP at market prices. So we know for the formula that GDP at market prices is equals to GDP at basic prices plus indirect taxes minus the subsidies. So GDP at basic prices is 300 plus the indirect taxes 20, 320. Subtract the subsidies minus 4, which should give you $316 billion. For 17, you shouldn't see. Number 18. Under which conditions will real GDP grow the fastest? So now they are asking us in which scenario will the real GDP grow? The first part of the table displays the rate of change in nominal GDP per year. The second part talks about the rate of change in the general price level per year. So this is the inflation rate, and this talks about how much GDP is growing in the nominal terms. So we know in order for the GDP to grow in real terms, it must be after nominal GDP subtract inflation. So 0 subtract a negative 2 would give you a plus 2. 0 subtract a 2 here would give you again a negative 2. 2 and again you subtract, this will give you a plus 4. And here 2 subtract 2 will give you a 0. So which scenario is giving you the highest change in the real GDP? Option C. I hope this is clear. Moving forward, MCQ number 19. MCQ number 19 says a government is planning to increase its expenditure on defense. Half of this expenditure will be on equipment such as planes and weapons, which will it have to import because it does not produce this in the home country. What is the initial impact on injections and leakages from the circular flow of income? We know what is injections. Injections is when money is added. So when you add money, that's injections. What's leakages? When you withdraw. So now we know it was injecting on defense and half of it was being spent on import. So the initial rise in injections was what? More. The initial rise in injections is greater than the initial rise in leakages because it's spending half. right? So for 19, we'll shade in A. Number 20. What might be a consequence of a fall in the domestic price level? So if inflation falls, what happens? Consequence. Fall in inflation means real value of money will increase. So the purchasing power will increase, right? So more goods and services, right? So what should happen? So the real value of income will increase. So because when the inflation is going to fall, people are able to buy more goods and services and enjoy a higher standard of living, right? So for 20, we'll shade in D. Number 21. A steel producer changes to electrically powered furnaces to reduce emissions of greenhouse gases. This results in a loss of jobs. What type of unemployment is this? So in order to prevent negative externalities, the producer switched to electrically powered furnaces. As a result, labor was left unemployed. So, what type of unemployment is this? Cyclical, frictional, seasonal, technological. It's because of a change in technology, switching to efficient technology system. So, 21, it has to be D. Number 22. They displayed us a diagram that shows the inflation scenario from 2020 till 2026 almost. They are saying the diagram shows changes in a country's price level over a number of years, during which period of time did only disinflation occur. Disinflation is what? A situation in which there is a fall in the rate of inflation, such that the rate is falling, but it is still greater than zero. So now you notice from 2020 till half of 2020 it was rising. But then it was after 2021 that it started to fall, and it continued to fall till 2022, and here it was still positive, and it was in the middle of 2022. It was in 2023 that it went to zero. So we know disinflation is that a time when it is falling, but it is still greater than zero. So what's the time period? 2021 till 2022 end. So this satisfies option B. So for 22, we'll shade in B. It has to be positive. It has to be greater than zero. Number 23. A government increases the basic rate of income tax to finance additional spending on apprenticeships and training. So now it's increasing income tax to spend more on training. What type of macroeconomic policy is being used? So income tax is what? Fiscal policy, and it's spending on training. So that's what? That's supply side policy. Nothing on monetary policy is talked about. So we're talking about supply side policy and we're talking about fiscal policy. So it's 23. It has to be C. We're not talking about monetary. So we'll shade in C. Number 24. Number 24 displays the long run average supply curve. The horizontal axis displays real output. The vertical displays the price level. They say the diagram is shows an economy is in equilibrium with real output of Y. Price level is P. The government aims to increase the real output from Y to full employment of FE. So now it's initially over here, it wants to go over here without increasing the price level. So it wants to remain at the same price level, and how is it possible in the long run? So which fiscal policy change is most likely to do this? How should you think it should go about? Decreasing the rate of income tax, decreasing spending on education. If it stops spending on education, it's going to worsen of the scenario. Increasing the level of sales tax would increase the level of inflation. Increasing welfare payments would make people more lazy and they won't be a part of education. So it's only through decreasing the rate of income tax that is going to encourage people to work, right? So when more people are going to work, productivity is going to increase, and without increasing the level of inflation, we are going to be producing more output of goods and services. As a result, output will rise, and for 24, we'll shade in A as a correct response. Number 25. A government reduces the tax on company profits from 28 to 20%. Which statement best describes this policy? Now, why do you think there's a reduction in the rate of corporate taxes? It is both a contractionary fiscal policy and a supply side policy. It's an expansionary fiscal policy and a supply side policy. You see, when it's reducing the tax rate, it's what? We are talking about fiscal policy, and we are also talking about supply side policy because we are increasing the output level. And once we are decreasing the tax, so we are expansionary fiscal policy. So it has to be B. For 25, we'll shade in B. So we're increasing the production level. So it's supply side policy, and we are reducing the tax rate level. So it's expansionary fiscal. Number 26. Which policy is most likely to have a contractionary effect on national income? So why do you think national income would shrink? Which would do that? A reduction in income tax rates. If there's a reduction in income tax rates, so the national income should increase. A reduction in interest rates, if again interest rates should increase, so there should be an expansion of production activity. An increase in government spending, again if the government spending is increasing, so output level should expand, increase. C says an appreciation in the exchange rate. So if there's an appreciation in the exchange rate, what happens? Exports get expensive, imports get cheap, so national income should fall. So for 26, it has to be C, because exports revenue would fall. What is an example of primary income in the current account of the balance of payment? We know what is primary income. Primary income is payments. Balance of payment is what? That's a record of a country's economic transactions with the rest of the world, right? So primary income includes income in the form of profits and interest and dividends earned on direct investments abroad, right? And on foreign earnings or investment in the country. So it would be what? Incomes in the form of profits, interest, and dividends earned on direct investment abroad. So dividends received by a Pakistani resident from shares in a domestic firm, it's received locally. Similarly, profits of Pakistani businesses exporting goods, again, you are exporting, right? So it's a profit. Salary received by an engineer operating in Pakistan, again, we are talking about a local transaction, right? But when we are talking about balance of payment, we are talking about economic transaction that a country has with another, with the rest of the world over the year. Plus, it has to be income in the form of profits, interest, and dividends earned on investment, right? So it has to be rent that a resident of Pakistan receives from a property that it owns in another country. That's primary income. So for 27, we'll shade in C. 28. What is meant by comparative advantage? Comparative advantage refers to when one country, it's a situation where one country can produce a product at a lower opportunity cost than another. This is the definition of comparative advantage. 28 has to be A. Why it can't be B? One country can produce more of a product, that's absolute advantage. Lower barriers to trade and more efficient, that's not comparative advantage. Definition says A. So for 28, we'll shade in A. 27, we shaded in C. 29. An economy specializes in the production of one product. It exports this product to obtain another product. So now it specializes in one and exports it to get other product. What type of diagram shows this combination? It has to be the trading possibility curve. It's trading, right? So this is the curve that displays that. 29 has to be D. Trading possibility curve is a diagram that shows how an economy benefits from specializing in trading. Last MCQ 30. The main export of a country X is oil. The world demand for oil is price inelastic. The world supply is reduced by oil producing barriers, including X. Imports into X are unchanged. What are the effects of the actions by major oil producing countries on terms of trade and on the current account? So now what happens if the supply falls? So the price should rise. So price should rise, so terms of trade should improve, right? So we know that the demand is inelastic. So the current account should have a positive effect. It should improve. What is terms of trade? It's the ratio of export prices and import prices, right? So the terms of trade should improve. So it has to increase. So we'll show off C and D, and current account would also improve. Why? because since the demand is price inelastic, even though the price is going to rise, there will be no fall in the quantity, right? It would be in favor, right? So for 230, we'll shade in A. I hope you understood and enjoyed solving this paper with me. Stay tuned, subscribe, happy learning.